Hello and welcome to day 10 of Adventures in Tarot Casting. I am back refreshed. I had a good night's sleep, so I am ready to tackle this board. This is the one I meant to do yesterday until, I had a lack of sleep and all that jazz. So anyway, this is the Ancestral tree casting board. It can also be the Tree of Life. It can literally be used however you want to use it, but I'm going to explain to you what inspired me and then also a couple different ways that you can use this particular board. But again, anything that I ever say in these videos is just kind of a little guideline to get you going. It's not the end all be all. If you feel called to use these boards in a different way, then by all means, say you just like a tree as a pretty backdrop and you want to go from there, go for it. So I have always really been into my own personal ancestry, my roots. I've done countless hours of tracing my ancestors back to like the 1500s and coming from, Western Europe. I found out, it was funny, growing up, because my maiden name is so obviously German, we just assumed that my paternal side was German, but it turns out, yes, there is some German in there, but it's mostly Scottish and Irish. But it's just that one name, is the one that kind of spanned down the time. But so anyway, that's just a little bit about me. And so this tree then, I got the book, and I'm going to link it in the comments, The Ancestral Tarot by Nancy Hendrickson. And I was like, what a great idea. I had done the spread that she had done, that she had put forth, which is like a genealogy spread using your ancestral pedigree, which is what this is, and created a board around it. And then of course, it needed to be in color. So now here we are. So basically the big placement would indicate you, right? Like your base, who you are. But it could also be say you want to know a little bit more about your mother, your father, or some specific family member, then you can use that central focus as the signifier. And then you branch out from there. You could also just use this, and I've done this before, where you use this as a central, say you have an idea that you need to do and you're faced with this idea. You could use this as you, and then these as the two ideas, and this will give you some, as you work your way out, it gives you different scenarios that come from this idea, and this different scenarios that come from this choice, if you have to make a decision. For the sake of this demonstration, I'm going to talk us through just an ancestral pedigree. So I am using the Pocket of Peers Tarot as the central card because I have a card in there that is me. So you can pick one that is your signifier. Say you align with the Page of Cups, then put the Page of Cups there. I personally align with the Eight of Pentacles. Shocker, I know, because I'm always working, I'm always doing something, I'm always creating, I'm always prototyping. The Apprentice card, I think of myself as an apprentice of life. So the Eight of Pentacles is definitely my signifier. So there I am in the Pocket of Peers, and I do have the one from Out of Hand that is also my signifier, just to show you side by side how when you create a tarot deck, you get to pick a card for yourself if you're so inclined, and that is my card. So whenever you get either one of these cards in this deck, I want you to embody Jamie energy. So we're going to put that there and see how now that's the base of the tree. And I'm going to be using the Out of Hand Tarot for my family pedigrees. On the right side, because it has the moon, and then on the sun side, because it has the sun. The moon I'm going to use as my mother line, and the sun I'm going to use as my father line. The stereotypes, it's more inner and passive and intuitive, and very motherly would be the moon. The sun, very, dominant, shining, bright, outward, extrovert, typically father type of energy, right? But you can use whichever side you want. I'm just using it for my own personal, it's what I've chosen, So now I'm going to pull a tile each, one for my mother and one for my father. So for my mother, we have the Emperor, which, you know, which totally fits, because my mother was always also my father. Like, I don't come from a family that was, like, my parents split up when I was 2. You know, my mother was always both parents to me. And for my father, we've got the King of Pentacles. And again, that fits, because while my father may not have been in my life, he was there financially to support me. And still at times, if I need something, I can reach out to him. It's not like it was when I was younger, but, you know, without going into my deep, deep history, these 2 cards actually fit flawlessly for my parents. I actually had my mother walk me down the aisle in my first marriage, because she, like I said, was both parents to me for my most life. Like, growing up, my mother is the parent that I call for anything. My father is the parent that I would call if I needed help getting a car. If I, you know, like, it's only in our adult life that I have rekindled a relationship with my dad, but I was not close with him. So for him to show up as the King of Pentacles, it's brilliant and it's perfect. And because these 2, so then you can look at this and you can go, okay, how do these connect with me? Like, if I'm sitting here, well, because I saw how hard my mother had to work to be both parents, and because, you know, financially I saw that my father did well in his own workings, I think it instilled a work ethic in me to constantly make sure that I can provide for myself. And that is also that 8 of Pentacles energy, right? So let me just grab a sip of coffee. How cute is my mug rug? This is by Jenna, Moonlit Faye. And I love it so much. Anyway, so I get back to this and I go, all right, well, I want to know a little bit more about my mother. I want to know, okay, maybe what her parents are like. So now we go, keeping in the same line, this is her mother and this is her father. So my grandmother, we've got the 2 of Wands over here. And this is really good if you don't know a lot about your grandparents. It's going to help give you a little bit more insight about the energy of maybe who they wanted to be, or who they were, and how they showed up in the life. Even if you weren't connected with them, Nancy talks a lot about it in her book, about we can connect with our ancestors through the cards. I highly recommend the book. Definitely check it out. Like I said, I'm going to link it in the notes, because it's a way to get to know those people who maybe were absent from your life. And now, in my case, all of my grandparents have passed on. So this allows me to see them in new lights, right? And so for my grandfather on my mother's side, we've got the 4 of Pentacles. And so right away, when I see these 2 energies, so my mother is the emperor from this. And towards the end of both of their lives, she also took care of them, right? And she had to be a little stern and a little strict with them. So the 2 of Wands as my grandmother on my mother's side shows somebody who had bigger plans than what her life actually panned out for. And I can see that. And I know, like, this is a card of desiring to go travel and to go see the bigger world, but it's not one of doing it. And I know that about my grandmother. I know she sacrificed a lot, and she probably put a lot of what she wanted to do aside, because she was the mother of 5 children, I think it was. Yeah. And then the 4 of Pentacles, the first thing I feel when I see that card is locked away resources. And my grandfather was a hermit. He was absolutely somebody who wouldn't speak openly about his emotions and definitely kept things locked away. Somebody who conserved their resources a lot. And also, he wasn't somebody who had a lot of money, but he had a lot of knowledge in how to do things. You know, he was a gardener, a farmer, and he's the one who coined the term for us, our wants are many and our needs are few. So if that's not a 4 of Pentacles energy, I really don't know what is. So how did they get to be this way, right? Like, how did they get to be this dreamer who doesn't get to go on the travels? And I'm gonna bring this over a little, just because I can see in the light here that this is shining too much on here. Anyway, so how did my grandmother get to be this way? What were her parents like? So now we go into her pedigree of who my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather, who I did not know at all. And so we have the Hierophant. I'm going to put that in my great-grandmother. And then we have the Eight of Pentacles for my great-grandfather. So on my mother's side, I can only, now this is where we get into the thing. Unless you know a lot about these people, and even though I've studied the ancestry, I haven't deep dove into their lives. So this is all speculation at this point. But this is where the cards can come in and say, okay, well, my great-grandmother was somebody who was perhaps a teacher. She was a matriarch of the family. And I know just from doing some little tiny deep dives, and my mother will have to confirm this. I know she's been watching the video, so maybe she'll note in the comments what her grandmother was like. I feel like she's somebody who really believed in traditions and was religious of a woman, and I know this to be true because that time period. But I feel like she was somebody who also empowered a level of learning into her children. And, while my grandmother may never have gone after her vast, wider dreams, she was not an unlearned woman, and so I see that Hierophant, and it's because she was so influenced by the structures that were handed down to her. This is what you have to do. And then my grandfather, I see this, my great-grandfather, I see this as somebody who also is a hard worker, also who, maybe he wasn't there a lot because he was providing for the family. I mean, they had a lot of kids. So it makes sense. So he was working, and she was the one who was in charge of making sure everything was getting done and teaching and just helping these people become human beings, right? So now let's go to my grandfather, his parents, my great-grandfather and my great-grandmother on my mother's father's side. So it's easier if you do it like this, like you kind of work as you would an ancestral pedigree. Obviously, if you're doing this, you can either record it and listen to it back, and you might want to take notes because you're going to get a lot of information from it. And you could keep on, obviously this board is limited space, but you could keep on, and if you want to know more about this, you could even find the Hierophant card and be like, I really want to know about my great-grandmother Woolette, so I'm going to put that there and then do the same thing. You could spend an afternoon getting to know your ancestors just in this particular way. So now we're going to go to my grandfather, right? And I said he's a hermit. He was somebody who was very worldly but didn't want material stuff. By the time he passed away, he was living in a camper on my mother's property and just enjoying nature around him and enjoying his shows and enjoying probably bothering my mom, but that's neither here nor there. So his mother, and we've got the Two of Pentacles, and then his father, and we've got the Page of Pentacles. Now, one thing that I know that Nancy suggests is when you're doing this, you can put all the tiles back or all the cards back, and so that each person gets a chance at the full deck. I still find that the energies fit, like the Hierophant would have been really good for my paternal great-grandfather because he was actually somebody who studied genealogy and did a lot of things, but the Page of Pentacles fits because it's a student, right? It's somebody who's exploring knowledge. I know a lot about my great-grandfather, Roland D. Sawyer. He actually, there's a whole section of, I want to say, New Hampshire University has a whole section on him and the books he's written, and he's written a book about the genealogy of the Sawyer family in Kensington, New Hampshire. So he was this perpetual student. He was this person seeking knowledge. He definitely was that Page of Pentacles. And then the Two of Pentacles, I don't know much about my grandmother on that side, but I feel like because she was with such a brilliant mind, a seeker, that she had to maintain that balance. She was somebody who had to help find that middle ground between what her husband did and what her children needed, right? So I feel like there's a lot about resources, especially on this side of the family. It's all Pentacles energy there. It's not a lot of dreaminess, it's practicalness, so you can kind of see where that comes down. And because of this, my grandfather inherited this means of, okay, our wants really are many, but our needs are really few. We've survived on little. This is what we do. So, he was, like I said, he was a farmer. He knew how to make crops grow. He knew how to plant money, so to say, right? Like, you know how to garden, you know how to feed yourself. So then that was passed down to my mother with that emperor energy, you know, so she's the byproduct of all of this, and I'm the byproduct of all of that, right? So now let's go to my father's side. Now, excuse me, my father is still alive. Obviously, so is my mother. But again, all my grandparents are not. So this King of Pentacles energy, I see that right away as my dad. You know, I see it as somebody who has always put money was his love language. You know, he didn't really know me. He didn't get to meet me until I was about 5 years old, because we did not live, it's not like today where people live, even when they're separated, they live in the same state. Like, my father was in California and I was on the East Coast. So when I was little, I wouldn't go see him. I remember being 5 years old and going on my first flight to California from, I think at that time we were living in Virginia. I'm not quite sure. And flying out to California with my older brother and being like, oh, do you think my dad's gonna like me? Because I didn't know him. I knew my stepdad as my dad, right? But he was always there to financially support his children. It may have taken some teeth pulling, but he was there. And so my dad has always pursued a life of finance. He's always been this King of Pentacles, so it totally fits. And where does that come from? So we're going to pull a card for his mother and his father. So for my grandmother on that side, we have the Knight of Swords. And I know my grandmother, and she was a very outspoken woman, and she was somebody who would speak her truth even if it didn't, she never really thought about how it might affect the people around her. She may have had some big opinions, but she would listen. But she definitely, I could see her being in this protest energy of, well, this is what I'm doing. You can come with me or not, you know. And then my grandfather is the King of Wands, and I see that energy a lot in both of them. So I love how this shows up. I did know these grandparents a lot more than I was closer with my paternal grandparents than I was with my maternal grandparents. And, you know, it's not something I can go back and fix, but it's something I can get to know a little bit more and validate this particular reading. So going with my grandmother on my father's side, Tish is her name. Tish was very, like I said, very outspoken. She was more outspoken than my grandfather. She definitely, you know, I love the megaphone there, because she was the socialite. She was the one that, you know, organized the parties. Like, I loved going there when I was older because they would bring all their friends. She was just communication was definitely part of her repertoire. But sometimes maybe she spoke before she thought about it. So that's that Knight of Swords energy. She wasn't like the queen where she knew when to keep her mouth shut. She would definitely just speak her mind. And where does that come from, right? So this is where we go into her parents. So for my great-grandmother, who I did know a little bit, I've got the Six of Swords, and that completely and utterly fits. And her husband, so my great-grandfather on my grandmother, is Death, and that fits. So I know nothing about my great-grandfather. All I know about him is that my great-grandmother left him a single mother of, I think she had 2 children, but the one died when he was 2 or 3. And she raised my grandmother in a time as a single woman when women didn't do that. She chose to be that Six of Swords. She chose to move on to her safety in order to not be with a man who was not a good partner. So to see Death show up with that, like if I wanted to know more about my great-grandfather on this side, I could take this card and pull it here and do his family tree to find out why he was this way. I don't know much about him. So I love that Death showed up in that position, but I also know that because my grandmother made these decisions, my great-grandmother made these decisions to go and pursue a different life. You know, that Six of Swords is leaving the troubles and seeking out safe passage. And in the out of hand tarot, I have somebody filling out customs forms going in an airport. Like, it's just going to new horizons, allowed my grandmother to become the outspoken woman that she was. So then we get to this King of Pentacles. This is my father. This is his mother's side. So you can see where that comes in. And now we're going to go to my grandfather's side. I don't know anything about these. I would have to speak with my uncle, because my father doesn't probably know as much either, to verify. So at this point, the grandmother and grandfather on this side is going to be a little bit speculative, but the cards are going to let me know something about them, right? So when I shuffle, I'm thinking, okay, my paternal great-grandmother, and I've got the Five of Swords. And then my paternal great-grandfather, I'm going to shuffle. And we've got the Five of Wands. Okay. I love that they're both fives. Okay, so now I'm going to put the tiles off to the side and just pull this over here. Okay, so the Five of Swords, seeing that, I can only speculate that maybe this was a woman who kept a lot of secrets. You know, maybe she was somebody who didn't feel like, maybe she had a lot of things that she wanted to do but didn't feel it was her place to say things, so she kind of kept to herself, and just I find a sense of like mental struggle going on there, you know. And then with that Five of Wands energy, I see somebody who, again, the fives is generally like a conflict, a struggle type of card. This is somebody who had a lot of ideas and maybe didn't know which way to go with them, and so he was constantly bouncing them off of his wife, or maybe he wasn't. This was a time when maybe men didn't really value their women's opinion. Who knows? But knowing that my grandfather really valued my grandmother's opinion, I feel like he didn't come from that kind of lineage, you know. So, like I said, I don't know much about those great-grandparents. I can just see that they lived during a time of struggle. And it matches. It's the Great Depression happened back then, you know. Raising a family. I think my grandfather maybe had 2 siblings. I know he definitely had 1. So, you know, they didn't have a huge family like my mother's side did, but they were big thinkers. You know, this side of my family was pretty well off, and I imagine, especially with my grandfather and his mind for money, his mind for business. You know, him and my grandmother owned a printing business for years. They were these commanding energies. You know, my grandfather had the big ideas, and my grandmother worked in the warehousing part and controlled the workers and did all the things. So it makes me just see that because my grandfather watched this struggle, that he wanted to do more. And because my father came from very outspoken parents, money was his driving factor, is his driving factor, you know. So this just shows you how you can use this board. And again, if you were like, oh, I really want to know about this one, I'm going to bring him here and then do the whole thing over. You can use the same steps when working through an idea. You can use them and go, okay, this is me, and I have this idea, and this is an idea, and choose a signifier for each idea, and then go through it and be like, okay, this could bring all these opportunities, and this could bring all these opportunities, or they could be those decisions, you know. I love the idea of a tree, because it talks about branching out, and not every branch on a tree has a chance to grow, but not everyone bears fruit, right? So this is a way to look at which limbs maybe need to be trimmed, or maybe we're the bad bearers, you know, like where there was holes in our plot line, right? The story of us. So I hope you enjoyed this little glimpse into my personal family history. It's, like I said, it's a great way to connect with your ancestors. You can use it anytime you're feeling like you need to connect with them. Just because they're gone doesn't mean their energy is gone. Like, we know that about energy scientifically. It can never be destroyed. It can only be transmuted. It goes into other things. And I feel that that is part of who we are. So is it so preposterous to think that the energy that was once our grandparents is not accessible to us? And tarot, like it's a symbol thing that allows us to speak with dreams, why not have it be a symbol to speak with those that are no longer here. So that is this board. Like I said, I'm going to link Nancy's book and her website in the notes, and I will see you tomorrow.